Good evening, world and Idaho voters and residents. My name is Dustin Hurst. I'm Freedom Bro number one, and this is episode 21 of Freedom Bros. This is going to be an amazing episode because one of my favorite state senators, Scott Herndon, is going to join us in just a few minutes. He's been on the show before to talk gun issues with the city of Sandpoint and a gun preemption thing. Go back and watch that one. I'll put the link to that one in the show notes. That was a good episode. This time, we're going to talk about what is probably going to be the biggest race and could be the most expensive legislative race in state history. We get Scott Herndon versus Jim Woodward, part two. I am so excited for this race. We're going to talk about it. And before we do that, I have two items of business. First, I need to play our amazing over-the-top stinger. And then I got a special message for a very, very bitter, very sour ex-legislator who refuses to come on this show. So item one, let's do that stinger first and kick off Freedom Bros the right way. Okay, if you weren't hyped up before, you are now. Okay, before we get to Senator Herndon, he's waiting, been patient with us. We've been having some technical difficulties, so thank you, Senator Herndon. We'll get to you in just a minute. But first, Mary Souza. Goodness gracious. Look, she has always been a rhino, like absolute disappointment to the conservative cause. And people tell me that she was once a good conservative in the city of Coeur d'Alene, and she paved the path for the conservatives that are there now. If that's true, it may be. I don't know. I don't know the full history of Coeur d'Alene politics. But if that's true, what the hell happened? Like, what the hell happened? Mary, I am sincere in my interview. She and I went back and forth on Twitter a little bit this week. And I said, look, you keep taking shots at good conservatives, me, my friends, Fred Birnbaum of the IFF, who has more integrity than anybody in politics, bar none. She sits behind her computer and just types out these little angry missives every so often. Never has to defend herself, never answers for the BS she spews. And I said, look, Mary, I'm here to have a conversation. And when I mean that, I mean, like, I offered her full, unedited interview here on Freedom Bros. Come spew your vitriol to the masses. You can say whatever you want the entire time. But guess what? So can I. So can I. I gave her 3 days to accept the invitation. And I would have, my schedule's pretty complex. I've got a job, I got family, I got sports, I got stuff to do. I got to go to the gym because I'm fat, right? She had no interest in coming on, even though I offered to schedule around her. Mary, you're a keyboard cowboy who lacks conviction and the courage to defend the nonsense that you spew. But I want to be gracious about this. If you still want to come on the show, or if you ever want to come on the show for unedited airtime, no commercial breaks, no editing, no selective editing, nothing, you are more than welcome to come on Freedom Bros anytime. And I know you probably won't, because you like to just fire bombs and never defend the crap that you say. But the invitation remains. Now that we've got that out of the way, let's get on to something better. 2 years ago, a very bearded man from Sandpoint, or from District 1, I don't know if he's actually from Sandpoint, I'll ask him in just a second, came out of nowhere, ran a really, really good campaign, came at Senator Jim Woodward from the right and said, hey, this guy's actually kind of a rhino, not actually conservative. This dude raised a ton of money, ran a really excellent campaign, and toppled a senior member of the Idaho Senate. I've been impressed with him every step of the way, and he stayed true to his word. Let's bring him on now. Senator Scott Herndon from District 1. How are you, Senator?
Hey, I'm doing great. Great to be here.
So, first of all, what city are you actually from? I should know that.
Well, actually, I'm in Sagal.
Okay.
5 miles as the crow flies south of Sandpoint. And if you mention Jim Woodward, I think he and my house are maybe 2 miles apart. And this
Really?
is a 3,016 square mile district.
That's I'm sure you guys get really friendly when you see each other on the backcountry highway passing each other. Okay. Okay, before we get into this race that's coming up in 2024. By the way, I mean this is already a top tier race and we're 6 months out. You ran for office what, 2.5 years ago. What motivated you to jump into the race in the first place to unseat Jim Woodward?
Well, that's easy. It's because his representation was terrible. That's what motivated me. It really stood out during COVID because this is a guy who, on a simple petition to the federal government, SJM 105, where the Senate, which isn't very conservative, basically said they don't want the federal government mandating the COVID vaccine. Jim Woodward testified on the floor of the Senate that no, if you're in the military and the government tells you to get a vaccine, I think you ought to roll over and get a vaccine. And that was offensive to me. Pretty much the entire thing that the state government did during COVID was offensive. Jim Woodward was on the wrong side of every single question during COVID. He voted to give driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. He was one of a literal few senators out of 80 something Republicans that voted against the No Men and Women Sports Bill in 2020. And it was just votes like that that were completely out of touch with the voters in this district that caused me to jump into that race because I figure if I don't do it, I can't expect other people to do the job. So that's why I took them on.
What that it's so interesting. District 1 has always been so interesting. Before it was carved up by redistricting, it had Jim Woodward and Heather Scott in the same district. That was fascinating to me that you could have an actual principled conservative in with a unprincipled liberal hack in Jim Woodward. That's an aside. What was your key to victory in 2022, do you think?
It was making sure we actually reached the voters that would vote in a May primary, a Republican primary. To be honest, we went from 9,000 voters in a May Republican primary in 2018, which was an off presidential year election, to May of 22, my election. We increased turnout 55%, almost 14,000 vote up at that May
Wow.
Republican primary. And the reason they did is because it was the most expensive race in state legislative history. Between Jim Woodward's camp and the PACs that supported him, and my own campaign and the PACs that supported me, there was $470,000 spent on that race. The previous average in Idaho was $12,000. And the difference that it made is that voters knew exactly what their choice was and they realized it was important and they showed up to vote. And we beat them by 12 points,
Oh,
1,700 votes, 1,800
oh
votes.
my goodness gracious. That's not a small thing. I remember I've been to several candidate trainings, and it always makes me chuckle when the people who are presenting, they mean well, but they say, "Oh, the average cost of an entire race in the state of Idaho is about $30,000." Yeah, maybe, but some of these top ticket races, it's I my guess is your race is going to cost $500,000 this year, obviously because of inflation, but also because the special interests are not a fan of you in any way, shape, or form. We
Mm-hmm.
intercepted when I was back at IFF. We intercepted an email that said from a lobbyist that said Woodward, Crabtree, and Patrick were our like go-to votes on transportation, and we're not sure what we're going to do now. So you kind of upset the apple cart. Did you? What was it? What was it like? I guess the question is this: like, did you? I'm not sure where I'm going with that question. Never mind. Let's drop that one. Um, what you've been in the legislature 1 year now. I'm sorry. I'm still getting the hang of this interviewing thing. You've been in the legislature 1 year now. What was your proudest moment, or what was your best achievement of this year?
Well, probably the best achievement was when we overrode the governor's veto of House Bill 292, to be honest with you, because in previous years, the Senate was absolutely incapable of overriding governor's veto. I think it had been 16 years since the
Right.
legislature overrode a governor's veto. And that's because what would happen is you'd have senators vote for something, and then the minute the governor vetoed it, they would test the winds. Maybe they wanted his favor, and so they would switch their votes. And Jim Woodward was one of those guys during COVID.
Yeah, I was gonna say
And
he flipped
so
on one of the COVID bills, right?
he did. Yeah, he was one of the flip flop five, is what we called him during COVID,
That's right.
uh,
That's right.
regarding the
I
governor's emergency powers.
Yep, totally forgot about that. Yeah, that was I think that was a really important vote because not only did it show that he's on the wrong side of everything COVID related, like literally everything, but he had no courage in the votes that he had. And I think there's a lot of people, and tell me if this is wrong. Maybe this sentiment still exists in the old guard in the Senate. I think that there are some senators who feel like they actually work for the governor. Is that does that still stand in some of the Senate today?
I would say that a lot of the legislature really takes the governor's lead. House Bill 24 was a classic example. That's the Idaho launch bill this last session. And there would be people, you could make the best Republican argument against a corporate welfare bill. And there were 13 Republican senators out of 28 that joined the 7 Democrats and voted for that bill. So it became law because that was Governor Little's baby. He really wanted that bill. He wanted that program. It's an IACI program, benefits the big corporations in Idaho. And so there are people in that room, in that Republican caucus room, that definitely are in sync with the governor. If you look at what the governor does, he argues a lot of Democratic talking points. And even though overall Idaho's not too bad off as far as its governing policies, it is drifting with every other state toward more and more government. And so that is a lot of what's in the room in that Senate caucus room. But we've got 10 people there that are not like that, which is great.
It's a growing number. I remember in 2021, the session before yours, or 22, there was one solid conservative. Like there were two that were okay, but there was one solid conservative. And to go from 1 to 10 in a single election tells you a couple things. Number one, the state is getting more conservative. It tells you that I think people really did see the Senate as complete failures on COVID. And I think it says that people are tired of being lied to about the political policies that are coming about in Boise. And the Senate is the center of that. The House has typically been the conservative firewall. But people saw the Senate and they're like, man, maybe we need to make a change here. And I think we're going to see more of that. Let me ask you this. You went in, I think you were pretty well versed and pretty prepared for what the grind of the Senate would be and what the culture would be. But was there anything that surprised you or disappointed you in particular? Like, what was your biggest disappointment this first year in the Senate?
Well, before I get to my disappointment, I'll say as far as surprises go, nothing was a real surprise because as a citizen, I already tried to run legislation. I already had a couple bills passed as a citizen. For 4 years, I had written some pieces of legislation, like 12 bills, and gotten a couple of them all the way through the process just as a citizen. So I knew the process pretty well. I knew it
Right.
was really hard to get stuff done. I showed up this first session. I had 15 pieces of legislation. 8 of them were signed into law. So it showed that
Wow.
I knew how to use the process to create successful legislation, which, by the way, for my detractors, there are a bunch of leftist detractors who say Scott Herndon is this extreme person that can't get anything done. Yet I got 8 bills signed by the governor. Some of them passed unanimously with the Democrats voting for them. Others passed with every Republican voting for them. So clearly, I'm able to show up and on a number of different topics get legislation passed that the state needs. And so that was not a surprise. The thing that was a little disappointing is that it's really hard to move a core middle of people. on something that you think you could convince them of, it's very difficult to convince them, especially if it's talking about reducing the size of government. So, an example, if we should cut $4 million of DEI positions from the universities for LGBTQ sensitivity positions, you would
Yeah.
think that we could talk the legislature into that. And doing something like that is really difficult. We're going to try it this next session, but it's not easy to do that stuff. People are stuck. This is my biggest disappointment. The Senate is, especially when Woodward was there, was like a rubber stamp for pretty much any governmental program that came along and
Right.
any budget that came along. And I
Right.
think Wayne Hoffman with the IFF compiled the statistic. He said in previous years, 60% of the Senate votes were unanimous. That's like 200 bills were unanimous. But nobody says no. And this year
Yep.
we lowered that percentage to 20% because someone
Good.
should say no. There's got to be
Yeah.
someone who thinks an idea is a bad idea.
Well, and it's let's pause there for just a second. The whole DEI thing. I went through that when I worked for Idaho Freedom Action. We actually managed to cut like 1.2 million from universities for DEI programs, and that was just a small sliver. You would have thought we were clubbing puppies. Like it was the weirdest thing. It's like, guys, this is bad. This is woke indoctrination, and I think in the last some of these terrible events that happened to us, COVID, the war on terror, last week's massacre in Israel, and the response from the universities over the last week. Oh my gosh, Scott, I am I'm horrified. Look, I believe in speech and I believe you should say what you think, but the intellectual rot and the actual evil, and I mean that in the very little literal sense, the evil that has permeated the highest levels of our institutions today, and we wonder why our kids turn out the way that they do, why they're woke as hell, and why they continue to support some of the most mind-boggling policies, and why they believe a man can be a woman and vice versa. So I guess the question is cutting that DEI stuff possible in a legislature that's resistant to that? I mean, what's going to change this year that maybe didn't happen last year? Is there a game plan for this?
Yeah, well, I think it's possible if we show up with a policy bill on day one that says we're going to cut the positions. I think that we were hindered last year because we all had just one election in November. So there wasn't a lot of time to coordinate with each other to prepare for the session. And the difference this year is that a lot of freedom loving legislators are coordinating ahead of time so that we show up with the game plan of how to get publicity for our bill, make sure we're hitting all the right people there with the bill idea, that the bill is fully formed on the day we show up. And we have to literally approach it as a policy, and we have to say, look, we're not going to fund DEI for LGBTQ. I always get the letters mixed up.
You can't keep up with them. It's
LGBTQIA
impossible to
plus. I
keep up
know.
with them. It's not a thing.
No, but the bottom line is they literally spend $4 million and they didn't negate it. And then, we kind of learned that last year too. We really learned the scope of the problem. We learned that there's legitimate DEI. There's a couple of positions that are legitimate inclusion type positions if you're talking about Native Americans and military veterans. But the vast majority at the University of Idaho and Boise State is they're completely woke institutions that are absolutely catering to the insanity of the LGBTQ agenda and somehow thinks that that fits into a university scenario and should be a legitimate budget process and student activities in a center with staff. And that's just, look, if I always say, if it's 2023, if you roll back the clock to 1985 to 1989, when I was at a major university, Arizona State, and we had zero of that stuff, if we didn't
Right.
need it then, we don't need it now. I guarantee we don't need it now. It's just some new woke agenda that they want to fleece the taxpayer to fund.
I was at again. I was at IFF when Donald Trump won in 2016, and I remember writing this is what DEI personnel is largely good for is stupid crap that doesn't need to happen. Right? there was an email that went out from CWI and other colleges across the country, but I was focused on Idaho, and it said, "Hey, we know that the Trump victory was troubling for a lot of students, and if you need counseling or support, we're here for you." Listen, I understand that an election can be troubling for a lot of people. I'm not disputing that actually, because politics is a rough and tumble sport, and people are legitimately worried about the future of the country. But if you aren't man enough or woman enough and strong enough to deal with that in an appropriate manner, and you might need therapy or like adult coloring books at your college, I don't know that you should be in college. I really don't think so. And in the latest foray into this stuff, like, it's interesting that the DEI crowd, they're the like words or violence type crowd, right? And somebody made the point on Twitter, there are protests across the country on college campuses that are supporting Palestine and saying that Jews deserve what they got. So how is it that the words or violence crowd is so silent on Palestine? And as an amendment to that, somebody needs to go walk around Boise State and University of Idaho campuses and see if there's any of this crap going on. I bet there is. But anyway, I hope you guys can defund this. But the question then is, how do you stop them? Is there a way to stop them from using private funds? Because what they'll do is they'll either go fundraise from donors, or they'll say, oh, well, we have Coke vending machines on campus and we use the revenue that we generate from that to fund these programs, and F you, legislature. That's what they do. Can you stop that?
Well, the reality is probably not, except you could do, I'll give you the option you could do. But yeah, what they'll do is, because they said they're already doing this, they'll go get a grant from a company, Micron, and they'll use that money to fund the DEI position. Half of
Right.
the money they raise, we funded them $680 million, and they raise a whole lot of millions besides that. And they'll say, well, fine, we'll just use this other money. We'll use this private funding. In fact, what we did get accomplished last year is we said, well, you can't use legislative appropriated funds for DEI positions. So we didn't cut the 4 million that they had for DEI positions, but we basically said they can't use our appropriated taxpayer money for it. And they said, yeah, but we're not doing that anyway. We're going to use these private monies. The only way, this is a state institution, and you could argue that they have a right to use private money to do that. But because they're a taxpayer funded institution, the only way you can effectively leverage them into actually getting rid of the program is to say, fine, we'll cut $50 million from your other programs until you obey us. I mean, until you
Yeah.
listen to us and
Yeah.
are directed according to our will. The bottom line is, if they're a state institution, the legislature has complete authority over state institutions. And
Yeah.
therefore, they should abide by the will of the legislature. The legislature is, the people have the sovereignty. They've granted it to the legislature. It's our money, and the universities have to abide by the will of the legislature. But you're going to have to extract it out of them through force by
Yeah.
taking money away from them. And that's where I don't see the legislature having that will. We'll see.
Yeah. I have never understood. I mean, I get it, but like, I don't live this way myself. Like, if the legislature, they created universities. It's like, it's kind of like my mom. Like, when I was young, it's like, she said, I made you. I brought you into this world. I can take you out of it. And that's the same thing. The Boise State University is a creature of and created by the state government, and they but you guys, so far, most of you, not you particular, but the legislature has been unwilling to use the big stick that it holds, to get Boise State in line. And that's unfortunate. It really is. It really is. Now, I want to shift gears just a hair to the next wokest institutions in Idaho, public schools. The biggest failure, not a surprising failure in any way, shape, or form, but the biggest failure of the session for me was there's no school choice. None.
Mm-hmm.
Zero. After the first session, the first regular session, after I think most of COVID was done and people could start focusing on other issues, ICE had been open about the woke agenda and how poor schools performed, and education choice couldn't make it off the Senate floor. What happened there, Senator?
Well, you have a bunch of senators who are not ready. They listen to the arguments of the left, and the left says, you're going to steal from our public school system and you're going to fund private religious schools. That's essentially their argument. And before we jump too deep into that, let me just say that the paper that your government is printing on comes from a private company. The roads that we all drive on are built by private companies.
Yep.
The government locally here is contracting with waste management for the garbage. In other words, public money goes to private institutions all the time. In fact, it's the norm. ITD is not building the roads. And we don't manufacture our own paper. We don't manufacture our own supplies. We use private companies all the time.
Yep.
And somehow people go into the public education space and they think that the government's got to run and do everything, or at least that's the way they frame the argument. And granted, the Constitution does say in Idaho that the legislature has to provide for a system of free, common, and public schools. But it says that that's for a purpose. It's for the intelligence of the people, basically to keep the republic. And if you look at the scores of students, the performance of actual students in their schools, and I looked at the latest ISAT, reading comprehension, the ELA, in some of my elementary schools up here in this district is like 40% reading at grade level. And the best school is at 70% reading at grade level. That's 30% at the best school that are not reading at grade school. And that's high school. If you're not reading at grade level by high school, guess what? You're never going to read at grade level. And the whole purpose of school choice is to increase competition because competition improves performance.
But Scott, all I hear from the governor and his legislative allies, the Democrats, is that we don't spend enough, and that's why our scores are in the tank. What would you say to that?
Easy answer. Go to California and New York that spend substantially more per student than we do, and their scores are no better. Because in a monopolistic system where the government controls the entire platform and the distribution of the service, the performance is never going to be good. And you can't spend enough on it unless you create competition, even for those public dollars. That's the bottom line. You have to create the competition. Otherwise, nobody is ever motivated to deliver better performance and to improve the system. There's no incentive to improve the system and improve the results because nothing's at risk to them. The alphabet soup agencies of the education establishment are perfectly fine with the status quo. And they all wring their hands and say, we'd like to improve performance, but we don't know how. But also nothing is compelling them to improve performance. And school choice is a way to compel them to improve performance.
It's interesting. Whenever a charter school fails, and they do fail from time to time, and they're well documented because people want to make a mockery of them. I don't think that's the own that the left wants it to be, which is they think, oh, well, charter schools, this one failed, so they're all failures, and you should stop supporting charter schools. I'm like, wait a second. No, this is literally what I want. I want bad schools to fail, whether it's financial mismanagement or mismanagement of student or personnel issues. If you're a bad school, I want you to fail. There are IFF provides a lead map. It's at leadmap.org, and you can go look at every school district in the entire state. You can look at their test scores for 4th and 8th grade, their social justice incidents, and a bunch of other data. And you can see that if we applied some of the metrics that we applied to charter schools to public schools, we would have way more school failures and school closures. But we don't have that because the IEA has a powerful lobby, and the ISBA is a powerful lobby. Education Inc. is a very real thing, and so we just can't let that happen. But let me ask you this: I was in DC last week talking to some people just at a different event, and they're hopeful that a rewrite of an education bill could get through this year. And I've heard other things, and we'll get to that in a second. Is there any chance of education choice passing this year? Or I guess I should say in the next session, since it's still 2023.
Yeah, I would say in the next session, the only chance I think you'd have of an ESA passing through Julie Yamamoto's House Education Committee, because we passed an ESA out of the Senate. It was not the ESA I wanted. I wanted Senate Bill 1038, a universal ESA, but a trimmed down version, an expanded empowering parents type program, Senate Bill 1161, did pass. And Julie Yamamoto over on House Education Committee wouldn't allow a hearing for that bill. And my understanding is she does not want an ESA. However, there is the possibility you could get one passed. How? By creating momentum and pressure on Julie Yamamoto. She's going to be facing re-election in May. And if you create pressure, even she can bend. What would be really helpful is if the governor of Idaho would get on board, because the governor could provide some incentive to those who follow his lead, and that may tip the ball in our favor as well. Just like the governor of Texas just called a special session to include the purpose of enacting an ESA in Texas. So it does help when a governor's on board, but it also will help if Julie Yamamoto feels the incentive and the pressure facing re-election to actually get this done, which means people need to let her know that they want school choice. They want more school choice.
And you would think, Scott, that Senator, whatever you want me to call you, I prefer the
Scott's great for me.
Sometimes. Okay, I just like to be respectful and stuff, but you would think Julie Yamamoto comes from a very poor district in Caldwell. Downtown Caldwell is where she's at. Very poor district, and it was, I believe, a school district that kind of zigzagged into her legislative district that started the transgender bathroom policy. They adopted that policy, and that's where Chris Trakel got famous. He got on Fox News because he loudly opposed that policy, and he was right to do so. And so the poor kids in that district who were opposed to that policy, if it stayed in place, they would have had to deal with that policy. And there would have been no option, because they don't have the money that rich kids have to leave those crappy schools that might have a transgender bathroom policy. And the other point is, our governor is he's a liberal. I mean, like, there's no other way to say it. But it's also on the legislature too, because in North Carolina got school choice without the governor's support. You know what they did? They overrode him. They overrode the governor. So it's just, there is a lack of will among establishment Republicans, people like Treg Burnt, Jeff Schroeder, Julie Yamamoto, those folks. And those are the folks that need to be tossed on their butts next year. And people like Jim Woodward cannot be allowed to come back, because we'll get more of the same. We will get zero changes. We'll get more money and no performance at all. Sorry about my soapbox, but there it is. It's so frustrating. Let me ask you this. I have heard rumors, and I want to know if, and you can say it's proprietary or not, whatever. I've heard rumors that there's going to be a special needs ESA in this election, or I'll say legislative session, but I do mean election cycle. It's a very cynical move. I've heard that they're going to do a special needs ESA just so moderates and rhinos can have cover to say, I voted for education choice. Have you heard anything about that? And what's your take on a special needs only ESA?
I have not heard that, but then I wouldn't be surprised if that's been talked about. My guess would be that would be going around in the Main Street caucus and not the Idaho Freedom Caucus, not the conservatives, right? They're not going to be sharing that with us. I don't personally like that idea at all. The people who need an ESA, I can use examples from my district. We have a few private school options in my district. I have 3 public school districts and only 1 public charter school. So I got Boundary County, Lake Pend Oreille School District, and West Bonner County School District. And we've got quite a few private school options and new ones starting this year. Private school tuition around here, typically for K through 12, ranges up to about $6,000, which our Senate Bill 1038 was going to provide for in the last session. People cannot choose a private school option. If you're in West Bonner County School District and you're in one of those elementary schools that has 40% ELA reading comprehension, or Naples, which is the Boundary County schools, has like a 40% reading comprehension level, and you want an option, right now you're miles from any other school, we enacted open enrollment last year. So if there's an opening at another school, you could go to another school. But as far as private school options, your family in Naples may not be able to afford any other option. And that's the conundrum. And you're just a regular kid. You're not a special needs kid. We're talking about providing for every kid. And that's the key. If you look at the constitutional requirement, the goal is to educate everybody. Like that's in the Constitution. That's our mandate as a legislature. So the goal, even though it says a system of free, common public schools, the purpose is to educate everybody. And there are 325,000 kids in Idaho that need an education. We need to enable homeschoolers to be successful. We need to enable private schoolers to be successful. We need to enable public schoolers to be successful. And if they're not successful in the public school system monopoly that we're running, then we need to create an option for them. And that needs to be for every kid. Otherwise, we're picking and choosing and we're not offering equal opportunity, which is also in that constitutional mandate, that it needs to be uniform and thorough. And in my mind, it reads that you need to provide it for everybody. And I don't think they're meeting their constitutional obligation if they take any other out.
Agree. It's interesting that we always focus on the funding aspect, but we never actually hold schools accountable for their lack of performance. But that's neither here nor there, I suppose. But one more question before we get to the preview of this race. What's on, besides education choice and a few other things that we've already talked about, what's on the docket for the 2024 session? This is going to be an explosive session because tensions are going to be high. Everyone's going to want to get out of there, and everybody, and not one group or the other or that group or this, everybody is going to be peacocking in front of the cameras in an election year, right? Making names for themselves so we can all clip the clips and share it with our people. What's going to happen in the 2024 session?
Well, I guarantee there's going to be a lot happening. I've got some bills to actually eliminate some of our government, for one thing. So everybody's going to have their gig, but I can tell you from the Idaho Freedom Caucus perspective, there's a lot of hot topics that we still haven't solved in government. So besides actually starting to reduce what government does, we're actually going to run a couple of bills to actually reduce what government does. But getting into the hot button social topics, we still haven't solved the school bathroom problem. You know, we thought we had a success last year with Senate Bill 1100, and then a federal judge immediately blocked Senate Bill 1100 that says boys have to use boys' bathrooms and girls have to use girls' bathrooms. That's blocked. Most people don't know we were the first state to ban boys from girls' sports, the one that Jim Woodward voted on the wrong side of. A federal judge blocked that law. It's been blocked for 3 years. Those problems can actually still be solved. So I'm actually going to run legislation in the 2024 session to solve the school bathroom problem, to possibly solve the sports bill problem where boys should not compete in girls' sports. We're going to have bills that still go back and address some of the COVID problems. Are we going to have Myrna vaccinations? What about Myrna and our food sources? So there's going to be bills like that. We still have ESG issues. We haven't closed all of our ESG loopholes. We still have room for improvement on the Second Amendment. We got serious issues related to the Second Amendment in the state of Idaho. Dan Foreman ran a bill last year to get rid of that antiquated anti-militia law, and it passed the Senate and didn't pass the Defense Committee in the House. So you're probably going to see that bill come back. There's just going to be so much this next session, but I'm happy to say a lot of it. Let's go to the Library Obscenity bill. We haven't solved that problem yet. House Bill 314 that the governor
Scott,
vetoed. We've got to come back and hit that one.
No, I'm told that's not a problem. There are no obscene or pornographic books in our libraries, except that they're everywhere. So it's so silly.
Exactly.
They tell us it's not happening until they tell us it is, and that it's good for us. Oh goodness. Let's shift gears in a big way. What is this race against Jim Woodward going to be about in your mind?
Well, Jim, first of all, thinks he lost because he somehow didn't communicate with the district. I think he lost because he's out of touch with the district. North Idaho is very conservative. District 1 is very conservative. Now, it is true, unlike in a couple of our other conservative districts in the state, we have a very loud liberal contingent. And I think liberal
Yes.
Jim Woodward has been listening to the liberal contingent, and
Right.
he is in this echo chamber, and he thinks that District 1 is leftist and liberal, but it's not. And so my job will be to run a campaign. Look, I could put up his American Conservative Union rating against my soon to come out of ACU rating. I could put his Idaho Freedom Foundation rating against my Idaho Freedom Foundation rating, top conservative legislator last year. And the choice is stark for District 1. And the same
Right.
district that kept Heather Scott in her seat for 8 years is the district. That is the district. And in fact, it
Right.
even got more conservative because during COVID, a ton of people, thousands of people moved into District 1, fleeing leftist states and failed policies.
Yep.
And they showed up here and have gotten immediately politically active. People used to move and they'd wait a couple years to kind of pay attention to the
Yeah.
politics.
No
Not
more.
these people.
Nope.
Not these people. And so I'm going to
Have
make
you
sure to communicate to them. And they're going to know you have a choice between a leftist and a conservative, between a liberal Republican and a conservative. And he won't be able to say that he's the conservative Republican, I guarantee that. And we won't let him say
have
that because he's not.
have you seen his first campaign ad?
I have.
Okay. So we showed it on the podcast, I think 2 weeks ago. There was a moment in there. First of all, it's cringy. He's like you guys are politicians and not actors, but like it's very cringy. First of all, he just is very uncomfortable in front of the camera. That's neither here nor there, I suppose. But there's a moment where he talks about the like greater. I don't know if it was the greater good or the social good stuff that's bigger than all of us that we have to come together. What the hell was he talking about? Like, what do you think he was saying?
Well, okay, look, if you go to his website, he's got something on there. I mean, I'm just going to use this as an example because I think this is kind of where he's going. You know, the left has criticized the pro-life Republicans the last couple of years because of our abortion ban, and then they've lied. They've just straight out lied and said that Idaho's abortion laws are hostile to legitimate labor and delivery practices. They are not. And Jim Woodward, Jim Woodward's listened to that, and he's decided that basic things like pro-life and pro-gun are out of sync with this greater idea of Idaho. And so he's got something on his website that looks like he's pro-abortion, that apparently he wants to modify the abortion laws to make it easier for doctors to do abortions. And he's trying to find this middle ground. He thinks apparently running in a Republican primary and talking about this middle ground in infrastructure and other things is somehow the way forward for Republicans in a primary. And I'm just going to tell you that the thousands of people that moved to District 1 didn't move here for that. The issues they moved here and that they care about are not the issues that Jim Woodward's talking about. And he won't be able to represent them on those issues that are far more critical than some of the things that Jim Woodward would want to focus on. So I thought it was an ad that fell flat and was out of sync with the voters, but I'll make sure that the voters, my job is to make sure that the voters are well informed when they show up at the ballot on May 21st and they know the very clear differences between the two candidates in this race. And I'll make sure they know it. I
Yeah,
take
it's
my job
weird.
seriously when it comes to that.
Yeah, no, it's very strange when you have people like Jim Woodward and Jeff Agenbrod in District 13 going after Lenny. They literally, because of how you guys vote, and not because there's some obedience score, but because you guys are both very, very conservative men, they have to run to your left. There is literally no daylight for them to run to your right. And it's fascinating. And
Mm-hmm.
I understand how they're going to do it, right? They're going to say Scott Herndon is an extremist. He wants women to die. And what is it? What's the other thing? Oh, you're a white nationalist. Those are the three things I've heard that about Brandon Shippey in 9. And of course, I've heard it about Idaho's number one tweeter, Brian Lenny in District 13. Do you think that's label lynching, right? They're trying to get you And I think there's no truth to those things. Like, you're not an extremist and you're not a woman hater, are you? Like, you have like 55 daughters, right?
I can hear one of them singing in the background right now. So, yes, I mean, we've got a lot of women here in the household. I have to respect women because I live with 6 women. So, 5 daughters and my wife. Um,
Oh,
and
these
they
people.
all hold the same political opinions that I do. And I don't think they hate women because they are one. So, the reality is like for those people who say, because you're right. Probably the left is going to say, "Oh, Scott Herndon is extremist. He only focuses on one thing." Let's say, they'll pick one thing and say he only focuses on one thing. Kind of belied by the facts, but I'll make sure voters know the facts. Remember, I said I ran like 15 bills last year. 8 of them signed into law. The 8 were 8 completely different topics. And they were
Right.
for several of them were bills that people in this district asked me to run for them. And I'm going to do the same thing this next session. People have real problems. There actually are governmental solutions for some of their problems, legitimate interest of government to fix a problem that the government probably created. And so that's what a good senator does. And that's
Yeah.
what I do.
Yeah.
So,
No, I would say that most of the members of the Freedom Caucus, I think some of them are still getting their feet under them, but most of them are very responsive to requests. I was working with Brian Lenny. Apparently there's a debate thing, a debate regulation put in by the High School Activities Association that says kids can only go to 10 debate events per year. That's insane. That's
mm,
insane. That's like saying, Dustin, you can only go to the gym 10 times per year. Because that's what it is. It's intellectual exercise, and yet because of this policy that government has put in place, we are limiting kids' activities, right? So Senator Lenny has been very active in fighting for that. So it's been nice to see people fighting for limited government, and I don't know, it's just a breath of fresh air, especially in that body. So, um, let me ask you one question that I totally omitted earlier. You're on JFAC, right?
yes.
JFAC, for those who are uninitiated and not tortured by the morning meetings, 7 a.m. morning and 8 a.m. morning meetings, is the spending committee. And like literally, you could call it the budget committee, but literally, it is the spending committee where all they do is spend, spend, spend. My friend, Fred Birnbaum, has worked tirelessly to get that committee turned around. And it's a slow, slow roll because people know, the establishment knows, that's where the power is, right? Where you
Mm-hmm.
put your money is where the power is. The power of the purse is very real in Idaho. First of all, like, how are you alive after that, after a session of just spend, spend, spend? And then is there any hope that that committee could see any improvement in the next few years?
Well, I think we're going to see a major improvement in the next session. So, JFAC has a tour starting at the beginning of November. And I think you're going to see some fundamental changes take place as to how JFAC is going to conduct itself during the next legislative session. Here's the reality right now, the agencies set their budgets, they ask for a certain amount of money. The governor looks at the whole situation with all the agencies. He looks at the projected surplus. Last year, we showed up, brand new legislators, brand new JFAC, brand new committee chairs, and the governor had a plan to spend up the entire 1 point something billion dollar surplus with
Right.
his new programs. He left no room for an ESA, for example. So he left no room for the legislative initiatives, things that the people see. The legislature is the body of the people of the state. The
Right.
legislature has all the authority when it comes to spending and setting budgets, all of the authority. The governor has no authority when it comes to budgets. In fact, we could set the budgets, the governor could veto every single one of them, and we could override every single veto and literally set the budgets against his will. That's how much power we have. But
Right.
we haven't acted like that. We've acted like we're the mere policy implementation center of the executive branch and the
Yep.
agencies. And that's probably one of my biggest disappointments when it comes to budgets. The Senate didn't say no to a single budget last year. All of the alternatives we provided in JFAC, at most, we got 6 votes out of 20 on JFAC. But I actually think you're going to see a fundamental change, thanks to people like Fred Birnbaum and others, when JFAC comes into this new year, it isn't that we're all of a sudden going to start saying no to a lot of budgets, but I think there's going to be a lot more assertiveness of the legislature that this is our arena. We're going to do budgeting differently. And hopefully before those budgets ever start as motions and even make it to the floors, we're going to analyze them a lot more closely and actually try to trim some fat and leave some room for some legislative initiatives like ESAs. I think you're going to see that this year, thanks to people like Fred Birnbaum and other conservatives.
Yeah.
That's my
No,
hope
I
anyway.
There was a study. I did a study with it was actually with Fred. He helped me with the data. And there was one lawmaker who was, I'm not going to mention her name because she's out and it's not worth doing anymore. It's like whatever. If it was Jim, I would say it probably was Jim actually too. But there was a senator who went like 3.5 or 4 years without voting against an appropriation bill. Now, be spend happy all you want, but there is literally no way that you agreed with. There are about 117 spending bills every single year that have to be passed at some level. Doesn't matter the level necessarily, but she voted 100% of the time, every single budget. And like, that's just not responsible in any way, shape, or form. There's no way you agreed with 100% of those. So, and it'd be like people voting no on every single budget. There are some budgets I probably would vote for as a conservative in the legislature, but I would never vote no 100 or no 100% of the time. Sorry, I'm very tired. You've done
let's
us a
take
great
that as an
service.
example. I voted the Freedom Caucus. Freedom Caucus voted against a lot of budget bills last year. But let's just take public education. There are like 6 core bills for public education. And I voted yes for half of them and no for half of them. So I wasn't always a no. In fact, I even voted for the teacher pay increases, just as an example. But I didn't vote for the bill that included the classified staff pay increases only because I didn't like the discretionary line item of $48 million because I thought it should have been much less and it wasn't justified. So, but the point is that it should be a mix. You're going to be some no's and some yeses, even as a conservative. Some ideas, there are legitimate functions of government and they need to be funded, and some of them are being funded responsibly and some are not. And then there are illegitimate purposes for government.
It's like ISP, I think it was 2 or 3 sessions ago, asked for a helicopter. Nope, don't need that. Like, and because some of our friends, I think it was Ron Nate, voted against the helicopter, he was accused as voting to defund the police. Like, I love all these nonsensical games. Okay, Senator, you have done us a great service by coming on the show, spending some time with us away from your lovely family. Tell people, give them your pitch, why they should vote for you, and how they can reach out and support you and learn about your campaign.
Okay, sure. Well, I'll just direct you to my website, herndonforidaho.com, FOR, idaho.com. If you want to help my campaign, number one, on my website, I write a whole bunch of articles. I'm kind of like Brian Lenny. I put a lot of information there. There's a lot of my videos right on the homepage, short videos that you can see me in action on the floor, what I think about different subjects. You're going to get a lot more of that in the legislative session that starts in January. I write articles that really tell you how I think on a lot of different policy subjects. It's all on my website. You're going to see that I'm a very conservative thinker, but that I've gotten a lot of stuff done at the Capitol, even after only one session. Biggest help I need is, number one, for people to have a direct connection with me. Go to my website, herndonforidaho.com, wait 7 seconds on the homepage, and a pop-up box. Give me your first, last name, and your email address, and sign up for my newsletter so that I can reach you directly. Number two, if you got money and you want to help a good conservative stay in office, I got to raise $100,000 by May. I guarantee I've got to be prepared to spend that much because the other side is going to spend more than that against me. And so if you want to help, you can donate to my campaign. I've got a great donate link. In fact, I have a gear store at my website. If you want to pick up some swag, shirts, coffee cups, beanie caps, hats, go to my gear store at my website and wear my gear and get the word out. And really, those are the best ways that people can be involved. They're up here locally. Give me a call. and I'll tell you how you can actually help my on the ground campaign that's going to really ramp up in the new year. So
Very
that's
good.
it.
All right, Senator. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Wish you luck in the contest.
Hey, thanks, Dustin. It'll be luck and Godspeed, Lord willing.
Absolutely. Thanks, Senator. Oh man, he's a good one. He is a good one. I am so grateful to have people like that. We went from it's not like I don't know. We went from Sean Keogh, another liberal in that district, to Jim Woodward, slight improvement, maybe, I don't know, to Scott Herndon, who is a solid conservative. And the thing that I like about Scott is that he does get stuff done. And I'm not the guy who necessarily measures legislative performance on how many bills you got passed, because I don't necessarily think that's an accurate measurement, right? You could be passing Obamacare, for example. You got something done, but it wasn't the right thing. Scott gets the right things done. Um, he's a pleasant person. Sometimes politics, as you guys all know, can become very taxing and become nasty. And like I'm a perfect example of that. I get nasty sometimes because I'm so sick of the BS. Right? Scott doesn't. He's such a happy warrior. He's a pleasant dude to be around. Just a great all around dude. So go support Scott if you can. If you're up in the area, give him a call. I know he's very responsive. Now, for legal reasons, I'm just going to throw this out there. Obviously, I'm a fan of Scott Herndon, but this show wasn't a Scott Herndon is not a Scott Herndon fan club show. Jim Woodward, former Senator Woodward, you have the opportunity to come on the show if you want. We can watch your ad together, and you can tell me what the hell that was about. But I would love to. I would actually love to talk to Senator Woodward and former Senator Woodward and ask him how he thinks he's more qualified than Scott and why he's a better fit for a very conservative district. And I actually want to ask him about the weird, like, greater good line in his ad. So, Senator, you're more than welcome to come on the show and give us your pitch and to answer our questions. And you can ask for support just like Scott did. That's the purpose of the show, is not to necessarily support one side or the other. We're here to support conservative principles. And if you are the best carrier of actual conservative principles, we'll, throw our voice behind you. But at the very least, we're going to give you an opportunity to voice your side of this race, because it is going to be a good one. It's going to be a really good one. Like I said, $500,000 probably for that race. $500,000. So conservatives, Scott wasn't joking. Senator Herndon was not joking. If you can support his campaign, if you can support his candidacy, please go do that. That's really important. He's one of the good ones we've got to keep there. All right. Two things before we close the show. If you are in Boise, I know that a lot of you will listen to this after October 14th. But if you're in Boise or the Treasure Valley or even Twin Falls, if you're within a couple hours, Greg Pruitt, our Missing Freedom bro, is having an amazing gun rally noon, October 14th on the Capitol steps. Garen Thumb, I don't know the guy, but apparently Garen Thumb is some amazing bigwig in the gun community. He's going to be the keynote speaker. So that's super cool. I think Greg was excited about it. I don't get it. It's like, when somebody gets excited about an NBA team, like I'm happy you're excited about it, or my son gets excited about a new Pokemon card or whatever. Like, I love that you love it. I don't know. October 14th at the Capitol, on the Capitol steps, straight up at noon. Wear your guns. It's going to be fun. And you know that a lot of liberals will be standing across the street crying about how many guns there are. Wear your guns, operate them safely. I mean, you guys know that, obviously. But details are at idahogunrallies.com, idahogunrallies.com, or you can search for Idaho Second Amendment Alliance on Facebook and Twitter and Rumble. And then finally, tonight, I want to reiterate something I said earlier on the show. And I mean this for anybody who is a hater of mine or Greg's or IFF's or the conservative movements. Totally. There are a number of people who talk crap on Twitter, talk crap about in the papers about conservatives and good conservative lawmakers. But they want a one-way conversation. They don't want you to challenge their assertions. Mary Souza is one of those. I was appalled as some of the crap she's written about me and about my friends, not because they're my friends, but I like my friends, but because the information was so inaccurate and so um it was just ugly. It was just ugly. So Mary, this is your invitation again. Come on Freedom Bros and talk to us about your problems with the conservative movement. Tell us why you were so angry at us. You didn't used to be like this. And it doesn't have to be this way. We're not what you think we are. We're not extremists. We just want principled politicians to do what they say they're going to do, which is to follow the Republican platform. Do conservative things. That's all we ask. That doesn't make us extreme. But if you want to come talk about it, you have an open invite to Freedom Bros. Now, if you're a listener to the show, make sure you subscribe on Rumble, YouTube, find us on Facebook, look us up on Twitter. We're also on your favorite podcast platform. I use Spotify and Pocket Casts because I just can't pick one, and we're on both. So make sure you subscribe and listen, and things are going to heat up. Now, next week, we were supposed to have Dan Gookin from Coeur d'Alene after his blow up. Long story. He backed out, but I think he's going to honor his promise to come on in November after his dicey election. He got into a shouting match with a bunch of Republican women, and I want to talk to him about it. And he's also been one of the, quote unquote, extremist haters up in Coeur d'Alene. I want to talk to him. But so we'll find somebody new for next week. But 2 weeks from now, 2 weeks, and it'll be a Monday. I think it's like 10:30, October 30th. It'll be very scary, almost Halloween. Colton Bennett from Moscow is challenging Lori McCann, one of the most liberal Republicans in the entire legislature. He has agreed to join the show. He's campaigning hard. He's earned the endorsement of who was that? The guy I really like, Mike Kingsley. He has earned the endorsement of Mike Kingsley, which is not a small thing. And we're going to talk to Colton Bennett, see what he's all about, see why he's running, and see what his plan is to win. And I'm sure that as vice chair of the House Education Committee, Lori McCann will have all the money she needs from Education Inc. And we'll talk about that and how he plans to deal with that. So, guys, this is a great show. I'm thankful that Senator Herndon came on. I'm missing my fellow Freedom Bro, but thank you so much for joining us tonight. We do these shows not just for fun, although they are fun for me, but we do them to educate you and help you make better decisions at the polls. If there's somebody you'd like to have us come on, message me, send me a text. My phone number is 208-505-1185. More than happy to see if we can get some people on and make sure that this is informative and helpful for you. With that, we're going to play the amazing stinger, and then we will bid adieu until next week. Have a good night, everybody.